Samuel chapter 24. Thank you, Bruce. Now, last week we were talking about the conflict between Saul and David. Saul was anointed king by God, but hatred for God came into Saul's heart, and it overtook everything. God said, I will remove the kingship from him, and I will give it to David. So David was anointed by Samuel as the next king of Israel. And in last chapter we have David and Jonathan, Saul's son, together in fellowship. And Jonathan, who is the heir apparent to the throne, is saying, David, everybody knows you're going to be the next king. So I want to just tell you, communicate to you how unreasonable Saul is being here. And so in the end of chapter 23, Saul is closing in on David, and he's come to the desert where David's at. And Saul's on one side of the hill, and David is on the other side of the hill. And that's language for he's just about got him. And I want to suggest here that God is taking the measure of Saul. He's putting Saul's Saulness to the test, out for display. Okay, Saul, when David comes into your power, what are you going to do to him? What are you going to do with him? And so Saul is closing in. And I can tell you right now that the way the scriptures read, they give a hint, they give an indication that unless the grace of God were to come into play, Saul's going to catch David, and Saul is going to do what he's going to do. However, when God anoints a future for you, he also anoints the means by which he will bring that future to come to pass in your life. That's a really fancy way of saying God's going to preserve his own people for the service that he has outlined for them. And so if God has promised that David will be the next king of Israel, but he is not yet, I want to tell you, my friends, there's absolutely no way David could die, because God is committed to maintaining his promise. And so you see, just as Saul and the soldiers were coming around that hill to capture David, kind of had him cornered, what happens? God speaks in, God interrupts, he sends a messenger, King Saul, the Philistines are attacking. And Saul has to pull back and go and deal with this threat. Somebody once said, you are immortal as long as God has something prescribed for you in this world. And conversely, you're done when God says you're done. And we can argue about that all day, but it doesn't matter. Now, God has taken the measure of Saul, and he knows that this hatred is an unstoppable hatred. Saul will not relent. However, God does not merely test Saul here, but in 24 we're going to see that God can even test his own man. So let's join me together here in chapter 24. When Saul got back from fighting off the Philistines, remember, they pulled him away so he couldn't capture David. He heard that David was in the desert around En-Gedi. So this is the south and the eastern part of Israel. Saul led 3,000 of Israel's best soldiers out to look for David and his men near Wild Goat Rocks at En Gedi. There were some sheep pens along one side of the road, and one of them was built around the entrance to a cave. Saul went into the cave to relieve himself. David and his men were hiding at the back of the cave. David's men whispered, "The Lord told you He was going to let you defeat your enemies. Do whatever you want with them. This must be the day the Lord was talking about." David sneaks over. And he cuts a little piece off of Saul's robe. Saul didn't even notice. Afterwards, David was sorry he had even done that. And he told his men, "Shh, stop talking foolishly. We're not going to attack Saul. He's my king. And I pray that the Lord will keep me from doing anything to harm his chosen king." Saul left the cave and started going down the road. Soon David got up and left the cave. "Your Majesty!" he shouted from a distance. Saul turned around to look, and David bowed very low and said, "Your Majesty, why do you listen to people who say I'm trying to harm you? You can see for yourself that the Lord gave me the chance to catch you in the cave today. Some of my men even wanted to kill you, but I wouldn't permit it. I told them, I will not harm the Lord's chosen king. Your Majesty, look at what I'm holding. You can see it's a piece of your robe. If I could have cut off a piece of your robe, I could have done the deed. I could have killed you. But I let you live, and that should prove I'm not trying to harm you or rebel. I haven't done anything to you, and yet you keep trying to ambush and kill me." Then David says, "I'll let the Lord decide which one of us has done right. I pray that the Lord will punish you for what you're doing to me, but I won't do anything to you. An old proverb says, only evil people do evil things, and so I won't harm you. If you ever get some passive-aggressive flack from people, you know, we live in an aggressive world. And if you've been to New York, you've grown up around New Yorkers, you know how aggressive they can be relative to other people. They kind of swarm you, they move past you, they're moving 100 miles an hour, they're aggressive, they move fast, they hit hard, and they gotta do what they gotta do. Now, I'm not condemning that specific kind of lifestyle, but what I'm saying is this. When people come at you, and they come at you, and they accuse you, and they insinuate something about you that's absolutely destructive, but then they put that nice little warm smile over it. You know, as your friend, I just wanted to say this. And of course, it's not the least bit friendly. I have said to people, you know what, friend? May it be unto you by the Lord as you have meant it to me. Well, if they meant it for good, then guess what? God's going to bless me. And if they meant it for evil, then it's going to be to them the way they intended it for me. Remember Isaiah 54:17? Those who come against you in accusation will themselves be put down. God is very righteous in defending his children. And so David has done this with Saul. King Saul, got this piece of cloth here. It's pretty clear. I'm not after evil. If there's any evil here, it's not on my side of the table. I wonder what side of the table it could be on. There's only one other side of the table. And so he's calling Saul out. And then he adds this. Why should the king of Israel be out chasing me anyway? I'm as worthless as a dead dog or a flea. I pray that the Lord will help me escape and show that I am in the right. You can say that all the time. And, you know, when these celebrities, these people on the far left who have nothing but bad things to say about the Scriptures the rest of the 365 days, when they have that verse against you that they want, that makes them all of a sudden theologians, you know, this is a great time. You want to use those Scriptures against me? Do you not know what Isaiah 54:17 says? It says that if you come against me with a false accusation, God will make it to you the way you intended it for me. And so that actually really creates space in dialogues. I've had very aggressive social media interactions with people, and I've said nothing impolite to them. I've just said, may God do unto you as you mean unto me. And that it's amazing how that has created this space that really drops most of them. And not for the same reason it drops Saul here, too. And we're going to see how this plays out. Now, here it comes. Here it comes. The negative 3045th Oscars, starring King Saul. So Saul is chasing David with 3,000 of his best soldiers. And now this speech comes out. And David's got him dead to rights. What does Saul do? He starts with the cry train. David, my son, is that you? He starts crying. David, you're a better person than I am. You treated me with kindness, even though I've been cruel to you. You've told me how you were kind enough not to kill me when the Lord gave you the chance. If you really were my enemy, you wouldn't have let me leave here alive. I pray that the Lord will give you a big reward for what you did today. I realize now that you will be the next king, and a powerful king at that. Promise me with the Lord as your witness that you won't wipe out my descendants. Let them live to keep my family name alive. So David promised, and Saul went home. David and his men returned to their hideout. Why did they return to their hideout? Because some promises aren't worth the paper they're not printed on. We are moral jello. And I have seen the most aggressive people in conversations when they're called out, when they've been caught, when they're on the carpet, they've been unmasked, it's been revealed who they are. I have seen them do the Saul thing, cry and start talking victim. Poor me, poor me, poor me. Friends, that works for a great long time in this life, but it don't work one bit with God. Now, remember we talk about Saul. He's a man with murder on his mind. I want to tell you something about a side effect of murderous rage. Let's say that I have it out for my friend right there. I have it out for him, and I've got murder on my mind. We're going to see here at the beginning of chapter 25. We're going to see that it's not just between me and him. The conflict between me and him, even if he's done nothing to deserve it or even instigate it, if I have that sin in my heart, what's going to happen, and we're going to see here in 25, is that my desire, the desire to bring forth death, is this ravenous wolf. It's this principle that manifests. And so I have this murderous rage that is directed toward him, but because of the restraining hand of God, I cannot act it out upon him. What we'll see is you'll see that oftentimes one of you will be collateral, will be the damage to the side. You cannot focus hatred like a laser. Hatred is this huge raging fire, this battering ram that destroys everything, and the collateral damage is intense. And so now we have in verse 25, Samuel died, and people from all over Israel gathered to mourn for him when he was buried at his home in Ramah. Meanwhile, David moved his camp to Paran Desert. Now, a lot of people just read that and they're like, oh, these events happen, not too much of a link between them. Oh, this happens, David here, Saul here, there's a cave here, there's that here. Oh, Samuel died. Friends, think about what we've seen in the last few chapters. When God told Samuel to go and anoint David, what did Samuel say? He said, Lord, if I anoint David, King Saul's going to kill me. And so what's happened in the intervening time? Saul's chasing David. But in the meantime, remember the priests who were killed in the search for David? Well, who does that get back to? It's back to Samuel. News travels fast. I want to tell you, even in the Bronze Age, death is whispered through the grapevine very quickly. And so Samuel is sitting at home, and this murderous rage is unleashed at the highest levels of the nation. Now the text doesn't say. It literally could have been a complete coincidence. Oh, he just happened to, and this is not related to that. But I want to tell you something I've learned in life. I have learned that ungodliness has a way of coming about. I know relatives who couldn't get along, and that hatred grew between them until finally one of them died. And I want to tell you right now, that's scary stuff. So friends, the Bible says don't let the sun go down on your anger. And this is one of the reasons why. Quench that fire. Put that fire in the ocean of God's forgiveness. Because even if I have this anger to my brother and I don't take it out on him, Sri just comes over, he's minding his business. Meanwhile, I've got that spear in my hand. Sri opens the door, walks in, and says, "Hi," and I turn and I poke him in the eye with it. I'm speaking metaphorically. You know, Saul has threatened his daughter, Michal. Saul has threatened Jonathan. What are you doing, aiding my enemy? And David gave him this impassioned speech, and Saul cries. And at the end of it, Saul has cried so much that David's like, yeah, I think I'm going to stay and just stay here in this cave. So I want to tell you, evil is real. Now let's go and let's see another example of these evil times. So we've seen godliness, we've seen Samuel as an example, we've seen David as an example, we've seen Jonathan as an example. But you know, I want to tell you, this land of Israel is filled with a lot of worthless mamadabas. When I was growing up, friends, I grew up among tough people. And by tough people, I meant, I mean mean son of a guns. And I want to tell you right now, there's a special kind of destructiveness to growing up around that. So we're going to read about another example of it in the nation. So let's continue here in chapter 25, verse 2. David moved his camp to the Paran Desert. Now Nabal was a very rich man who lived in Maon. He owned 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, which he kept at Carmel. His wife Abigail was sensible and beautiful, but he was from the Caleb clan and was rough and mean. One day, Nabal was in Carmel. Having his servants cut the wool from his sheep. David was in the desert when he heard about it, so he sent his men, 10 men, to Carmel with this message for Nabal. I hope that you and your family are doing well and are healthy and all is going good for you. I've heard that you're cutting the wool from your sheep. When your shepherds were with us in Carmel, we didn't harm them, and nothing was ever stolen from them. Ask your shepherds, and they'll tell you. My servants are your servants, and you are like a father to me. This is a day for celebrating, so please be kind and share some of your food with us. My friend, when the king comes to your house and begs, the answer is not no. The answer is yes, your highness. Well, David's men went to Nabal and gave him David's message. And they waited for Nabal's answer. And this is what he said. Who does this David think he is? That son of Jesse is just one more slave on the run from his master. And there are too many of them these days. What makes you think I would take my bread, my water, and the meat I had cooked for my own servants and give it to you? Besides, I'm not even sure that David sent you. Calling the messenger's veracity into question. The men returned to their camp and told David everything Nabal had said. Okay, everybody, get your sword, David answered. Do you see the hardness of the heart? You're going to find that in life, it's not all one thing, it's not all the other. You don't necessarily find that everybody's heroic, and you don't necessarily find that everybody's like King Saul or like a Nabal. But what we do find is we find this mixture. And you have good people, and I say good in a relative sense, mixed in with the worst kind of crowd. And I grew up, my neighborhood, my family lineage was rough. Tough people, mean people, take no gumption people. And I will tell you, it can be a difficult thing to be around those kind of people. So meanwhile, they strapped on their swords, and 200 men stayed behind to guard the camp, but the other 400 followed David. It's not going to go well for Nabal and his household. Meanwhile, one of Nabal's servants told Abigail, David's men were often nearby when we were taking care of sheep in the fields. They were good to us, and they never hurt us, and they never stole anything from us while we were nearby. Whether it was day or night, we were as safe as we would have been inside a walled city. But now David sent some messengers from the desert to wish our master well, but he shouted insults at them. Our master is a bully and he won't listen to anyone. Isn't there something you can do? Please, think of something. Or else our master and his family and everyone who works for him are all doomed. Abigail quickly got together 200 loaves of bread, 2 large clay jars of wine, the meat from 5 sheep, a large sack of roasted grain, 100 handfuls of raisins, 200 handfuls of dried figs. She loaded all the food on the donkeys and told her servants, take this on ahead, I will catch up with you. She didn't tell her husband Nabal what she was doing. Abigail was riding her donkey on the path that led around the hillside when suddenly she met David and his men heading straight at her. David had just been saying, I surely wasted my time guarding Nabal's things in the desert and keeping them from being stolen. I was good to him, and now he pays me back with insults. I swear that by morning there won't be a man or a boy left from his family or his servant's family, as I pray that God will punish me if I don't do it. And then, boom, they come together. Abigail quickly got off her donkey and bowed down in front of David, and then she said, "Sir, please let me explain. Please don't pay attention to that good-for-nothing Nabal. His name means fool, and as you can see, it really fits him. I didn't see the men you sent, sir, but please take this gift of food that I've brought and share it with your followers. The Lord has kept you from taking revenge and from killing innocent people. But I hope your enemies and anyone else who wants to harm you will end up like Nabal. I swear this by the living Lord and by your life. Please forgive me if I say a little more. The Lord will always protect you and your family because you fight for him. I pray that you won't ever do anything evil as long as you live. The Lord your God will keep you safe when your enemies try to kill you, but he will snatch away their lives quicker than you can throw a rock from a sling." She's talking to the person who threw a rock from the sling and killed Goliath. The Lord has promised to do many good things for you, even to make you ruler of Israel. Do you see how everybody in the land knows what's going down here? This is not a surprise. The Lord will keep his promises to you. And now your conscience will be clear because you won't be guilty of taking revenge and killing innocent people. What is she doing? She's talking sense in a mad, mad, mad world. David, I know you feel insulted. But if you kill us, you will put a bad mark on your good name. You don't want that. It's not like you need to kill us anyway. The Lord has already promised to take care of your enemies for you. So you don't need to do this and get a black mark on you. Now when the Lord does all these good things for you, she said, please remember me. And David told her, I praise the Lord God of Israel. He must have sent you to meet me today. And you should also be praised. Your good sense kept me from taking revenge and killing innocent people. If you hadn't come to meet me so quickly, every man and boy in Nabal's family and in his servants' families would have been killed by morning. I swear by the living Lord God of Israel who protected you that this is the truth. David accepted the food Abigail had brought. Don't worry, he said, you can go home now. I'll do what you asked. Abigail went home and found Nabal throwing a party fit for a king. He was drunk and feeling good, so she didn't say anything to him. But when he sobered up that next morning, Abigail told him everything that had happened. Nabal had a heart attack, and he lay in his bed as still as a stone. 10 days later, the Lord took his life. David heard that Nabal had died. I praise the Lord, David said. He has judged Nabal guilty for insulting me. The Lord kept me from doing anything wrong, and he made sure that Nabal hurt only himself with his own evil. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. I will repay. My friend, has someone insulted you? Has someone dishonored you? You can let it go, knowing that however the Lord deals with it,